Hi, everyone, and thanks for listening. As always, Brian Jersky, Provost, and today we have a very special guest. Our guest is Dr. Bonnie Gasior, PhD. She is a Spanish professor at Cal State Long Beach and is recognized for many talents, but one of the things is her cross-departmental efforts to enhance the college experience for all of our students. One of her multiple accomplishments, she's been a recent CSU awardee of the Faculty Innovation and Leadership Award for Cal State Long Beach, a prestigious award. Dr. Gasior developed the Mental Health First Aid, MHFA, as a Provost Leadership Fellow. In response to the rising number of reported mental illness and distress on college campuses, Gasior's MHFA is a certification course for CSULB faculty and staff members to become first responders for mental health. MHFA empowers non-healthcare professionals to recognize signs of mental disorder in students and to intervene in crisis situations. She's also now the interim director of the university's honors program at CSULB, and as I mentioned, a professor of Spanish. How she does all these responsibilities and stay happy and sane, I don't know, but welcome, Bonnie.
Thank you so much, Provost Jersky. It's really an honor and a privilege for me to be here, to be invited to engage with you to talk about something that is very close to my heart and about which I'm very passionate.
Wonderful. Well, so let's talk about the big thing that we're all facing at the moment. And of course, as we know, there's several. But is it normal to feel anxious about COVID-19?
Absolutely. And I can't say that with any more certainty than I just said it. In fact, I think it would be unusual not to feel concerned and anxious. And there's no shame or weakness in that. I think a lot of people associate that with weakness. Anxiety affects us all to different degrees. We're all vulnerable, especially given these unprecedented circumstances and this uncertain, ever-changing reality. I think one of the challenges with living during a pandemic, which none of us has had to do before, is that not only are we worried about contracting the virus and what it implies, like how sick might I get? Will I lose my job? Will I infect others in my family? We're also concerned about our day-to-day as it relates to the virus. And that happens every time we leave our homes, even if we're taking precautions, because as we know, our knowledge about and recommendations for the virus are constantly evolving. So when we engage in activities that previously were innocuous, like taking public transportation or going to the grocery store, and those activities now have a stress gauge attached to them, we inevitably find ourselves in a state of constant alert, which is exhausting both mentally and physically. I'd say that for faculty and staff, telecommuting is a consequence of the virus and therefore can be a source of anxiety too. And for that reason, it's important to communicate compassionately and honestly with those who work alongside us. It's important to find ways to control your Zoom usage rather than having it control you. And remember that being connected means understanding your role in your office or a project or a task. It doesn't mean Zooming all day long. And for students, I would offer similar advice. Since many faculty are taking cues from experts to teach asynchronously, take advantage of that flexibility to plan ahead with your courses so you aren't at the computer for more than a few hours at a time. You probably wouldn't take 4 classes in a row on the same day, and the same goes for Zoom lectures.
We can see why and how you share your passion about this. It's, one of the things that I think is very difficult for some people is the question of structure, or maybe we can talk about control or certainty. And often in our sort of normal lives, we do feel we have a large measure of control, even if perhaps that's illusory. But how would you recommend that somebody feeling anxious could cope with just the uncertainty of the situation and how little?
Absolutely. Sorry. Yes. Coping is so important. A few weeks ago, I gave a webinar with 2 colleagues from Cal State San Marcos. And we've been citing a great article in Psychology Today by Dr. David C. Wang. It's called Coping and Caring for Yourself During the COVID-19 Outbreak. And I'd love to just share a few of the highlights from that article because it really resonated with me, and I think that most people find it very useful. So
Please do.
Mm-hmm. The first recommendation aligns with what we were just talking about, anxiety, right? As a starting point, we need to acknowledge that coping is necessary and that we deserve to be able to cope. If you say to yourself, and I'm guilty of doing this, I shouldn't feel anxious or tired or overwhelmed because my circumstances aren't as dire as others, you are speaking the language of denial. Others can have legitimate needs and you can have legitimate needs both at the same time. Second, he recommends that we know our social media limits. Mm-hmm. One way to break that social media cycle is to give ourselves a time limit each day of social media exposure. And when we reach that limit, to not reset it until the next day. Nevertheless, social media, as studies are now showing, is also linked to anxiety due to its association with feelings of jealousy and exclusion. And we need to be mindful of that. Third, he says we should also be mindful of how we compensate for the lack of control we feel in this world, in this COVID-19 world. I would say that finding a balance between micromanaging and disengaging completely from your life is the goal.
What you're saying is just so relevant to me as I think of my needs and my ability or inability to balance these things. Absolutely. And to relinquish control and to take control, and no doubt.
So stay in that present moment. And Wang says something that that for me has really, I think of all the things I've learned this year, has really resonated with me. He explains the difference between anxiety and depression. And he says that anxiety is reflected on a mind that is perpetually oriented toward the future. So think of things like worrying, needing reassurance, overthinking. That's anxiety. While depression is reflected in a mind that is perpetually oriented toward the past.
Right. Oh, that's so interesting. I love that contrast between anxiety sort of being focused on the future and depression being focused on the past. That's very interesting.
It's such a subtle difference, but I remember reading that and it really stuck with me. And I think it's a good way to explain to people what the difference is, because they often manifest simultaneously, but they are different.
Indeed.
Another recommendation, he says, take care of your body. I think we've been seeing this everywhere, right? To eat healthy, regular meals. Deep breathing is also great. I myself have been doing more of that. I've actually even seen in a few conferences, the organizers have brought in coaches who lead participants on these, they call them brain breaks, that involve stretching and breathing. And maybe even right now, it might be a good time to pick up yoga if you want to do that, just doing the very simple movements in yoga.
But you know what, Bonnie, that is such a great suggestion. And I'm thinking, why don't we do it right now? So, I'm going to stand up.
Please do. I'm already standing.
Okay, well, I will stand up and I'll go back behind my chair.
That sounds great. And maybe we just take a big inhale and then exhale. So we're going to inhale 5 counts up through the nose. Inhale up. Hold it. And then exhale.
Fabulous.
Wasn't that great?
It's already.
It's amazing. Like just doing that little physical movement really does help. Yeah, absolutely. We incorporated those. I did a bunch of webinars this summer for the Faculty Center, and my co-presenter is actually trained in doing that. So we started with a 2-minute just breathing exercise, and I think it puts you in the right frame of mind. Why not? You can do it at any time, right?
Right. And I'm just thinking, if I was lucky enough to be teaching at this time, I would sort of break my classes and kind of say, okay, folks, let's have a breathing exercise, or stand up, get behind your chair and do 2 minutes of breathing. How fabulous.
It's amazing. Yeah. I mean, it really can, it's almost like splashing cold water on your face a little bit, right? It reminds you that you're alive, that your heart is beating inside of you, right? And that's so important, I think, during this moment when we all can't be connected in ways we have been in the past. So
absolutely. Great. Yeah. Well, I mean, so, talking of people who are depressed or miserable, sometimes, and I think what you said earlier, sometimes social media pushes us into these kind of, what's the worst thing that can happen? What's the worst case scenario?
Absolutely.
what kind of advice would you have for people who feeling, really pressed into a corner like that? What can they do?
So are you talking like in a worst case scenario sort of
Yeah,
situation?
right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. Well, I guess that depends on the context of the question a little bit, since worst case can mean so many things, right? Is worst case, right? Are we going to be online again in the spring? Is worst case the vaccine isn't going to come for another year? So I think it depends, right? I think we have to go back to what Wang recommends, which is staying in the present moment as much as possible. And I know that that's hard for many people, but resigning ourselves to focusing on shorter term planning can be alleviating and empowering, right? Because it does give us a sense of control. I might not be able to plan what's going to happen in 6 months from now, but I can plan what I'm going to do tomorrow and probably next week and even next month, right? I'd say that resiliency is one of our greatest abilities as humans, and we will have to trust that just as there is this crisis period, a rebound or recovery period will follow.
I think that's very hopeful. I like the idea of rebound and recovery. I think, one of the things for me is that I'm very lucky. I have a partner and we have a home and we're together. But for people who don't, or staying at home in whatever circumstance, and may feel lonely and isolated, it's a really tough situation. What kinds of things do you have in mind that could alleviate that kind of loneliness and isolation?
Right. It's a great and at the same time a paradoxical sort of question, right? Because on one hand, we're being told, stay home, stay safe.
Sure.
But on the other, we're being urged to stay connected. Humans are social beings, right? So how do we balance safety with sociability? So I'd say there are many ways to stay connected, right? That could be chat, that could be text, that could be Zoom, or even sending letters and cards through the mail, which is, I think, a lost art form. There are also a lot of games that you can play. I engage in game playing with a colleague of mine and her family every weekend. We've done it almost every weekend during the pandemic. It's a drawing game and it's a lot of fun.
What game is it?
It's called Drawful. So it's a mishmash of drawing and awful. So the whole idea is you're given a prompt and you have to draw something that is completely whimsical, and then you guess what the drawing is. It's wonderful.
Oh, great. Okay,
right?
well, let's try it someday. I can definitely do the awful part. No
yes,
doubt.
it's so much fun. And I think it's fun because it induces laughter, and we need to remind that we're still allowed to laugh during this time, right? And it's important to laugh, right? It's healthy to laugh because it takes our mind off of the issues, the world's issues, right?
And I think it reminds us, as you just reminded us, that what we're being asked to do is be physically distant, because the virus is a physical thing, but we're not really asked to be socially distant, because, as you said, we're social beings and we need to connect and we need to see each other and laugh with each other and interact with each other, play with each other. So that's wonderful. Great advice, Bonnie.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I know sometimes people can get almost trapped into a cycle of worry, and sometimes that's a sign of serious, underlying issues. What should someone do if they just can't stop worrying?
Yeah, I would say that while feeling worried under these circumstances is fairly normal, if your apprehension begins to disrupt your day-to-day living, it's probably time to take action. Chronic worrying can take a toll on us mentally and physically and can signal an emerging crisis, which is something that we would like to avoid, of course,
so
right?
It's kind of like a warning sign, you say.
Exactly, right? So if you're having trouble sleeping, if you can't if this is something that's been going on, right? If you have it a day and it happens here and there, we all, I think, experience that. But if it's becoming a chronic problem, you probably need to reach out, right? Feeling overcome by such thoughts means it might be time to reach out for professional help, right? So this is a time where maybe you've been talking to a family member, and that's great. That can be a great stress reliever, but sometimes a professional needs to step in. And I would say that if it becomes chronic, that's when you need to take that next step, right? Because
just as a matter of Since you're talking about it, do you sort of know of any campus resources that our students or faculty
Yes,
could
so
access?
of course. So I would say the three, I'll mention three of them. So CAPS, right, which I'm sure everybody knows of, right, which is counseling and psychological services, right? And then along with Project Ocean, they have a whole staff of people who are willing to help students. They're doing teleconferencing right now with students. So I would encourage students to reach out to CAPS. That number is 985-4001. Students can also go, and a lot of students don't know this, that at the Student Health Services, right, they have not only telehealth services, but they also have behavioral health specialists on staff. So that's another resource where students can reach out. And then the Bob Murphy Access Center, BMAC, right, for differently abled students. They also deal with things dealing with like classroom activities, exam accommodations, things like that, things that are tangential to mental health issues. So those are just a few that we have on campus, and also, I forgot to mention CARES is another resource, which is overseen by the Dean of Students. And that's typically, if you're particularly concerned about a student, maybe a student who is unresponsive, a student who might be disruptive in class, that's when you'd like to probably fill out a CARES report. So there are tons of resources on campus and beyond campus, but I would say first look to campus.
I agree.
They're going to really be able to help.
You know, as President Connolly always says, she wants Long Beach to be a community, almost
Absolutely.
a family of people. Yep. And so, especially in these tough times, we're all doing our best, I think. Sometimes things happen that we don't intend. Sometimes people, get very anxious, and by all means, students, faculty, staff, reach out. We have resources and we can make things right, and we will.
Absolutely.
So, thanks for that, Bonnie.
Sure.
And I mean, I guess, just the emotional, I really like what you said about living in the present, because as you say, I mean, we're always looking back to the past, predicting the future, and of course we need to do that, but we also can't emotionally prepare for things that are completely outside our control, I think.
That's correct. Absolutely.
So what are your tips for emotionally preparing for the year you're facing as one of our leaders in the community in mental health, as one of our directors of a huge program, the professor of Spanish, a famous researcher? How do you kind of do it all and stay emotionally sane?
Okay, so, well, I think that the first way to emotionally prepare, and I've been giving this advice to my colleagues during workshops I've been giving over the last, several months, is to first acknowledge, right, if we're talking in the context of our classes, is that we're all in this together, right? It's really important to remember that. And one way to convey such a message is for faculty really to humanize themselves on day one.
Agreed.
That sets a really collaborative tone and can be very reassuring to students. And that's what they need, frankly, at this time, right? I just finished a few weeks ago an introduction to teaching online training sponsored by the Chancellor's Office. And one of the assignments was to create a 1-minute introductory video for students. And the objective was not only to welcome students to the course, but to also convey our willingness to offer support, to emphasize the importance of emotional wellness as part of students' success, right? And to really own our own vulnerabilities. Because I think a lot of times students just forget that we're human, right? And we just have to remind them of that we do all the same things. We sleep and go to the bathroom and eat and worry and all the same human things that other human beings do. So,
I actually have a story for you about that, which probably nobody has ever heard before, but it was one of the things that I think made me a better teacher, and it's exactly that, humanizing yourself. So it was the very first class I ever taught. And I was extremely nervous, and I had over-prepared in the usual way, and I had about 50 pages of notes and, all the usual hysterical things
I can relate.
that faculty do. And I walked into the class, and as I was about to introduce myself, I lifted my hand up and knocked my glasses off my face. And I thought, oh, well, that's the end. No one will ever respect me again. And in fact, we all laughed, and I relaxed, and the students saw me, oh, okay, Brian is just a person like me, clumsy as anyone else. And that made me realize exactly what you just said. Humanizing yourself doesn't give away any of your authority or any of your expertise. It just makes you more able to communicate, and especially in this tough time.
Yeah, and more relatable. I think that's so important, because often students see us as, especially students who are freshmen and coming from high school, for example, their perception is just a little bit different than maybe a more experienced student. I think we just have to remind them, that we're all humans. We're all in it together.
So. Right. And well, I think, with those words, I don't think we can say much more than we're all humans. We're all in this together.
That's right.
Recognize, I think, that people like Dr. Gasior and many others are behind you, with you, supporting you. We certainly are in the President's team, and if you have any issues, reach out, and really we're all doing our best, and we know you are too, so keep it up and we'll get through this together.
Absolutely.
So, Bonnie, thank you so much for making time in your busy day to come and speak to us and share your wisdom. It's really much appreciated. Absolutely. Thank you for the impromptu yoga lesson. I loved that.
Yeah, you surprised me with that. I'm honored to do some yoga with you.
Yeah, no, well, we should do it again sometime, because I feel so much more relaxed and aware of my breath, as one should be.
Yes, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for the invitation. I really do appreciate it.
No, of course, and of course, congratulations to you for all your achievements.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful that you can do them and be successful here at Long Beach.
When you love your job, anything's possible.